When id Software released Wolfenstein 3D in May 1992, the PC gaming scene exploded. You may not see it today, but back then at a time where games were 2D, this was mind-blowing. It became a top shareware hit, and followed up with Spear of Destiny, an add-on for Wolfenstein 3D. After that, id Software decided to push the tech even further, so they developed a new 3D engine, and within a year later, Doom was released on December 10th, 1993. And it released to critical acclaim. It made the same amount of money that Wolfenstein 3D made in a month, in just one day. And yes, we're talking $100,000. Not only that, about 2 years later, Doom had the most installs compared to Windows 95. It's crazy thinking that a game from 1993 can beat an operating system from 1995 in the most installs. And about 28 years later, Microsoft would own the rights to ZeniMax, who also had the rights to id Software. I do believe Doom's development history has been well documented over the past years, but it's still worth talking about. id Software originally planned to make a licensed game based on the Aliens franchise, but after negotiations with 20th Century Fox, it was abandoned in order to retain more creative freedom. So instead of a game based on aliens, it would focus on what John Carmack would conceive. Demons versus technology, imagined as a cross between Aliens and Evil Dead 2, and a bit of Dungeons & Dragons. Back when I did the Quake review, I brought up that id Software prioritized action above all else, and Doom was no exception. However, Tom Hall wanted a more elaborate story that takes place on an alien moon called Tangga, and featured 4 characters with different abilities. It was also planned to have 6 episodes in a follow-up commercial release. Although it is known that John Carmack felt the story would slow the game down more than helping it. Carmack would also quote, "Story in a game is like a story in a porn movie. It's expected to be there, but it's not that important." This disagreement would lead to Tom Hall departing from id Software to join Apogee Software before the game was released. However, some of these ideas from the Doom Bible would make it into the final release, like the WAD file extension, which stands for "Where's All the Data?" That was coined by Hall. Not only that, but some remnants of Tangga would be shown on some of the computer textures, and the only episode name that made it to the final game was Knee Deep in the Dead, the first episode of Doom. Outside of Doom, a few ideas from the Doom Bible made it to Apogee's Rise of the Triad, like the characters with different abilities, and even kept one name intact, and that being Ty Barrett. Another game that featured elements from the Doom Bible was Terminal Velocity, which included a planet named Tangga. Doom originally came with 3 episodes, with only the first episode being playable in the shareware release. However, 2 years later, it was extended to 4 episodes with the release of The Ultimate Doom on April 30th, 1995. This expanded version was distributed both as a retail game and as a patch for those who previously owned a copy. So how is the gameplay itself? Well, it's that simple killing and key hunting kind of gameplay we're talking about. So there is not as much to say except that if you compare it to Wolfenstein 3D, it's a significant improvement over its predecessor. One worthy note is that monster infights can be started when one type of monster accidentally hits another. I do have a thing for this logic, especially with later games, as it adds strategic flavor to the combat. So I appreciate this phenomenon, along with the fact that you can take advantage of it to conserve ammo. Speaking of that, the weapons are a bit standard, but we have some weapons that were interesting at the time. So you got your pistol, shotgun, chain gun, rocket launcher, but prepare yourself for the plasma gun, a rapid-firing and somewhat ear-blasting projectile weapon. Now, if you thought that was it, just wait till you obtain the BFG 9000, the game's ultimate weapon that wrecks groups of enemies in its path. This makes its history as one of the most legendary weapons of all time. The enemy roster has been documented plenty of times, so we'll just go over the roster as short as we can. Here we have the former humans that carry pistols or shotguns, serving as the low-tier hit scanners. The imp that basically shoots fireballs at you or claw at you if you go near him. The demon, or also known as the Pinky, serves as a melee enemy as it charges to bite you. It also has a partially invisible variant named a Spectre. The Lost Souls and Cacodemons serve as the floating enemies, where the Lost Souls are weaker and come in groups, whereas the Cacodemons shoot fireballs at you. Now, the funny part about the Cacodemon is that the design was taken from a Dungeons & Dragons art book. The Baron of Hell serves as the first boss battle in the game. In fact, you fight 2 of them in order to complete the episode. They are best dealt with using 5 rockets in my opinion. The Cyber Demon is the most powerful enemy in the game, and you deal with him in episode 2. Now, the only way to make it out alive would be to shoot it until it dies. And finally, you are met with the Spider Mastermind. I killed it quickly with a BFG. I always find the Cyber Demon hard to deal with because you have to heavily rely on dodging rockets, and 1 or 2 rockets to the face results in certain death. Whereas the Spider Mastermind is less spongy than the Cyber Demon and just mows you down with a chain gun. The level design to me is iconic. Like, I barely had a least favorite level for all 3 episodes. But however, we have to talk about this next topic, and that next topic is the 4th episode, Thy Flesh Consumed. Focused on more straightforward action, as not much thought was put out to the consistent plot, which is already the general focus anyway. I remember playing this episode on Ultra Violence and struggled on the 2nd level, so much so that I ended up cheating my way out of this level a while back.
I'm turning into Jim and I'm going to do this. Fuck you.
This episode is fine in itself, but I feel like E4M2 is my least favorite in this episode. Now let's talk about the music. Composed by Bobby Prince, and you can tell right away that id Software were influenced by metal bands like Metallica, Slayer, and Pantera. Most of the tracks were either inspired by those bands, or they're just close mirrors of some of their songs. Like, have a listen. Given the massive popularity Doom got back then, it received numerous console ports. The first being for the Sega 32X and the Atari Jaguar. Now, there were some that were good, like the PlayStation port, but there are also some bad ports like the 3DO port, but that's well documented. But I may talk about it in a future video. Doom would also come with co-op and deathmatch multiplayer, which at the time was an addicting experience. So much so that there were anti-Doom programs installed to office computers. It is also worth mentioning that Doom was what inspired people to make online gaming services like Dwango and Kali. Now, Doom's multiplayer isn't played as much these days because most of the multiplayer experiences went to Doom 2, but that's for another video in itself. But I will say that if you wish to play Doom multiplayer the way it was intended, I recommend checking out Chocolate Doom or a network guider of choice like Classic Gaming Arena or NukemNet. Now, because of Quake's release, it felt like Doom was about to die out into obscurity. And that was until in 1997 when John Carmack released the source code for Doom. It has since spawned many source ports and projects over the years. Beforehand, we only had access to tools like dhacked and various level and WAD editing software. It's crazy to believe that a game from 1993 is still receiving user-made content to this day, like how spending $5 can give you access to an endless amount of content to explore. And even if you don't have $5, there is always free Doom to check out as well. If you wish to check out some user-made content, I recommend checking out the id Games archive or even the Doom World forums. Now, if you wish to create user content, I recommend checking out these two tools, which is Slade for editing WAD files and Ultimate Doom Builder for making levels. I will say it's a really convenient level editing tool to learn when you're new, and there's a lot of tutorials on YouTube you can check out as well. Now, all you need to learn, of course, is the fundamentals of level design and a good workflow, and you should be smooth sailing. Okay, now the last part I want to talk about for this video would be my retrospective of Doom. It's easy to say that this game had a huge impact in my life, and it's funny to say that as a kid because I used to have a fear for horror movies. But that's likely due to my mother's obsession with horror movies in general. I believe my fear started to die down once I was introduced to Doom on both the Xbox 360 when that was fresh, and on my Pentium 3 Dell Dimension PC running Windows XP Home Edition. At that time, I only had access to the shareware version of Doom 95 that I downloaded on download.com, but I would later discover my father's CD case full of games, which had a copy of the Ultimate Doom, so I was able to have the full version that way. Meanwhile, while it did have a positive impact in my life, it didn't do so for my school life. Me and my family got into trouble to the point that they had to take action if I didn't stop playing these violent games. So I stuck to playing game trials off of MSN Games and other websites, whilst discovering real-time strategy games like Warcraft. However, I'll say this also has taught me how to lock the door and play Doom and other shooters that I have later discovered throughout the mid to late 2000s. Sometimes I would get caught, but you get the idea. Meanwhile, I'd later discover more first-person shooter games and even discover source ports like Z-Daemon and Skulltag, which has since expanded my venture into custom content by joining random servers. My fondness for Doom grew very strong, and it would be extremely hard to let go after all these years, despite school troubles and other things. If it wasn't for Doom, I would have either grown out of the fear of horror movies in a different way, or would have still had a fear for it. If it wasn't for Doom, my gaming taste would have been completely different today. If it wasn't for Doom, my life in itself would have been very, very different. And it has been an amazing ride leading up to 30 years since the game was released. But anyways, that about wraps up this video. Please share me your memories with this game, and I would like to hear them in the comment section down below. Anyways, happy 30 years of Doom, and peace out.